I was watching a YouTube video before you came in, and I think that
On
was...
what?
I have two key lights. I have a big Elgato key light here and a little key light over here. And they're both supposed to connect to Wi-Fi so that I can control the temperature and the intensity of the light with one app. And the big light is connected. The little light is not. I can't get the little Wi-Fi like indicator light to come on. So I was watching a video on how to set it up, and I haven't figured it out yet. But
okay. Well, your lighting looks fine. It's like a warm light.
I
So, like,
know. I was trying to lighten it because you should have seen it before. I looked like I was going to be like, hey, we're coming back off of 3 weeks of not recording, and I got a tan during tax season.
That would be
There's
great.
my tax season tan. Yeah, no, that doesn't happen.
That doesn't happen.
Y'all think too small, I got big dreams. You just starting, I'm way ahead at the end scenes. Started reading and dodging all of the quick schemes. Money like your Spotify, boy, I got 10 streams. Be real big, I gotta make it just for my kids and for their kids, just kids. That's well.
I am Daniel.
I'm Sarah.
And this is Acquisitive, episode 11. Coming back after a few weeks of not recording, but we are still talking about deals that fail to close because we aren't here to sell you the fake dream of running a business halfway around the world from your sailboat in the Mediterranean, because that most of the time doesn't happen. In fact, most deals don't close. So we're breaking down why deals don't close and why they struggle to close, and helping you learn from others' mistakes.
Timeline, just the order of operations. And it sounds like, Daniel, you did not spend tax season on the beach. You were busy.
Yes, I do still own. So I talk a lot about business brokering and acquisitions, but I do still own an online accounting firm called Profit and Grow, and we do taxes for our clients. And yes, I was very, very busy. More busy this year than I've been in a while, actually. Like I try to get it done so much sooner, but I really wanted to avoid a heavy extension season. So I got the vast majority of our work done before the initial deadline, which is great because now I can focus on year-end planning for my clients rather than taxes in, October.
That is nice. I wasn't super pleased with my situation because I had to follow up 3 times and be like, hey, are we going to file an extension or what's the plan? And then finally got an estimated payment, which was 6 figures. And they were like, so we can just draft that out of your checking account any second now. Just let us know. And I was like, who do you think I am? I'm going to have to move some money around, obviously. And it required additional days. So I was at the farm where we were throwing our party, like trying to connect to an old printer that was, in the back of a, like, covered in straw dust. Getting something printed so I can authorize ACH being pulled from a money market or whatever.
I mean, there's probably accountants out there that are just psychopaths, but I have to tell you, like, in my experience, we are sweating bullets when we are reaching out to tell, like, we do it with confidence and we're like, hey, you got to pay $100,000 in taxes. And we just like, but it's like pulling a Band-Aid. Just say it. Like, $100,000 in taxes. Hope you got that. Thanks. Pay here. Here's the link.
Yeah. In their defense, I was traveling and they emailed like, hey, we just need to get on just a quick call and explain some stuff to you so you know what's going on. And you could just like read the stress, but like, I can do math. It's not my, I know I'm going to pay a lot in taxes. So it's anticipated. And I have money put away for that purpose that's been in a money market. So I responded by email. I was like, I don't think we need a call. What's the number? So
yeah, they're just freaking out. But the money market thing, it's something that's so interesting because I don't know. I try to be like a non-traditional tax professional.
Yeah.
And I have I worked with some wealth managers that really turned me onto this idea that, I have to tell people to make estimated payments.
Right.
But the way the penalty calculates out doesn't typically, it's pretty far off of what you can get on an average return from the market.
Yeah.
So like a high yield savings account or money market account like often makes more sense.
Yeah.
And it's tough. Like, I don't know. I have a client and he watches these, so he's going to see this. But he wanted me to, wants me to calculate it. And I'm going to do it. This is my first year where I'm actually going to calculate the benefit to not paying estimated taxes. He watches this. The IRS does not. So I'm going to make him happy. And if the IRS starts watching these and they're not happy, well, call me. You have my number.
Yeah, please slide into our DMs, IRS. We look forward to you, and also get back to work. You've got a lot to do. No, that's I did kind of under that assumption because I did this cost segregation study, short-term rental loophole thing. Which meant my estimated payments for last year were like nothing because they're based on your tax liability for the year prior. So I knew I was not chipping away at any tax liability this whole time. So the whole time I was putting money into this money market, and I wound up making like $2,500 in interest, which wasn't that much on $100K. So I was like, was this more trouble than it was worth? If it had delayed, if I had had some penalty from like the delay of getting the money to pay the IRS, and I would have probably wiped that out pretty quick. So
well, you should hit the safe harbor. Yeah, you should hit the safe harbor numbers, and even if you didn't, it would be like a relatively nominal failure to prepay penalty. So it's like, now this year, you should probably
game on. Game on.
pay something. Or make a whole lot of money with your investments so that it's worth the failure to prepay penalty.
That's why I have everything in crypto. No.
I was joking about getting a call from the IRS. All right, for the record, I am not Sarah Sharp's tax professional. I do not do this tax return.
Yeah, but he does advise his clients to put everything in crypto. So, but it's
what's his name?
You do recommend that Russian-based crypto. No, I'm just kidding.
Stressing me out.
Yeah, you're getting so nervous. Don't worry, none of that's real. I don't even know if that's a thing. It just sounds like it might be. However, I did have like $10,000 invested in crypto, and it's doing great.
Nice. Yeah, everything is seems like up right now in crypto. I stay away from crypto. Crypto's not my game.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand it. So sometimes you need a dog in the fight to stay engaged. It makes the news more interesting. If you've got It's also why I don't actually look at the weather forecast, because I really enjoy the authenticity it gives to my casual conversations with people when they're like, see, it's going to rain tomorrow. And I'm like, really? What? It's so pretty today. Yeah. Like a lot or a little? Do you know? So I enjoy getting those updates from just passersby. But we did. So you were doing tax season, and I was at our family farm throwing a several hundred person eclipse party for the total solar eclipse, where the weather was perfect.
I saw the pictures. It looked beautiful. It looked like a great time. Way more people than I anticipated. Like when you said you were having an eclipse party, I was like, okay, never heard of that. But we don't have a ton of them. So I guess that's fair. But that was a lot of people. Was that all family, friends and family? It was a small town?
We had, the picture I sent you was a fraction. We had 250 name tags. We ran out of name tags. And I think Scott, my father-in-law, smokes hams. And he said, well, I Googled how many hams you need to feed this many people. It said 8 to 10. So I did 14 and we ran out of it. So it was rowdy. We had about maybe 50 people drive from Denver, which it's like somewhere between 15 and 20-hour drive. It's ridiculous. And my friends from high school drove up from lots of people from Atlanta, the Carolinas, like not short drives anywhere. It's not proximal to anything. But full totality. So it was very fun. And then the next weekend we went down to Atlanta for a wedding of our friend who is originally from Nigeria. So it was like a big rowdy Nigerian wedding, which was lots of fun. So that's how I spent my last bit of tax season, which my life focusing on accounting practice buyouts is somewhat contra-cyclical. So my tax season is like a delight and very, chill. And then it starts really buckling down now, right after tax season, when people realize they want to sell their practices. So
I was thinking about this so I was looking into stuff about the eclipse, and I did find out. So, as an introvert, you probably know that I don't like to throw parties, and I need plenty of time to plan. So I was thinking that the next eclipse actually crosses right over where I live in Florida. So I wanted to invite you to my eclipse party.
Oh no, I'm already otherwise occupied. I know it's in 2045, but because as totality is odd, it also is full totality in our mountain house. So you were invited to our cabin as well.
Deal. Okay. Forget our.
Yeah. I mean, you'll be at like the tree line, 11,300 feet altitude. So closer to the eclipse.
Oxygen? Like, can I
We
breathe
have an
there?
oxygen tank. So,
really? I was joking. I live at sea level.
So your whole head will explode if you go that, like a chip bag. You might want to stop in Denver for a couple days to acclimate. But yeah, so then anyways, the point of all of that is relative to timeline. And that was kind of what we were talking about, because we're both dealing with different client issues where, and I had one of these calls yesterday where somebody said, yeah, I think I need to buy this business now. Like what happens? Is there an LOI? And then I think from the question that they were asking me, she seemed to think that maybe that was the whole thing. Like the letter of intent was all of the legal work part of things. And she had plans to get a bank loan, but she said, yeah, I told my banker, but I'm not sure what kind of loan, the banker is going to give me. And you're like, I don't, just the way she was phrasing it gave me pause, that maybe she hadn't oriented herself in the spectrum of just the different steps along the way, and kind of how specifically she needed to champion the banking process. And you really shouldn't go to just the bank that you have your auto loan with and get an SBA loan. That's not your best bet. Usually you kind of need to shop this loan, and it's not necessarily like a mortgage where you can just rely on your real estate broker to do all of it for you. You've kind of got to lead that process. So I connected her with some banks.
And I feel like bankers have a nasty habit of thinking that they're the only bank in the world.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh yeah, we can't, that can't be done. It's like, you can't. It can be done. Like I had a commercial lender try to do that. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna be more careful about how I talk about this. A commercial lender, the bank does do SBA, but they are not a preferred lender. They do asset-backed loans. Like the SBA is just like not their thing. And they looked at a deal and they were like, yeah, this can't be financed. This doesn't qualify. And the buyer thought that meant this doesn't qualify by SBA standards. But in reality, it's just because they were looking at it through the lens of an asset-backed loan rather than a cash flow-backed loan. And it's a beautiful deal for a cash flow lender.
Yes.
So yeah, I know that's a major component that people don't realize. They think like, oh, I'll just go to the bank where I have a relationship, but they just don't know.
They don't. And why would you, right? Like we just live in this world all day long, every day. But before this, I didn't know that either. And so saying there's two, with the loan thing, people come to me and they're on one end of the spectrum. Sometimes they're like this person who said, I talked to my banker and, she, the banker said it can't be done, or that there's some kind of loan for it. And you're like, oh no, you need to really get moving. Cause this is clearly, it was like a $2 million practice acquisition, like add on to an existing practice. So you're not going to get like a HELOC probably that's going to be big enough that you can finance that whole thing. You're really looking at an SBA 7A loan, and that's a big process. So you got to get the ball rolling. Or they come in and they're like, I've talked to 13 lenders and I have term sheets at 6 banks. And you're like, okay, you need to narrow it down a little, because if you keep moving it forward at all of these different banks, you're never going to get all the way through. So it's time. Like, there is no perfect deal. Whatever small couple $1,000 fee difference you're going to ultimately suss out is going to be wiped away if you delay your deal because you're still shopping with banks and you haven't moved it forward aggressively. So
Right. So, I mean, yeah, we've talked to some great experts about why deals fail in due diligence, why deals fail at the closing table. But I think, like, realistically, most deals don't make it to closing, but the vast majority of those that fail to close also fail before due diligence. Like, they almost like
that's
fail
true.
to start, right?
Yeah.
Like, so you're searching, you find one, you
Yeah.
talk to the seller, you sign the NDA, and then what? Like,
Yeah.
and then you kind of fall off, and then somebody else swoops in, they put in their LOI, or they put in a purchase agreement, and like they get aggressive about it, and then you just get passed up. Or you think you made all this progress. This actually happened to me, like, true story. I went through a month and a half of negotiating the LOI all the way up to like starting the bank process, and then like needing to do the yeah, like, and it's because my LOI took so long. So, like, order of operations wise, it probably like made sense, but in reality, like, that stretches that deal out so far.
Yes. So going back, you would go and run those two paths in tandem? So you would be moving it forward with the bank at the same time that you were moving forward the LOI, or would you? Some options are people doing an IOI, which is just like an indication of interest. If the bank really needs one to get started, and that's just like purchase price and 2 signatures basically, so then you can get them moving.
So I'm doing a version of an IOI on everything, and this is like something that I know some, like, some more experienced brokers are like, it's not a step you don't need to take, but I like it, and I do it for a specific reason. So the way I get an IOI is I ask an interested buyer to send me an email. So just send me an email that expressing your interest in this. Tell me a range of what you think is a normal price for this. Like, you don't have to give me something specific. Just give me a range so we know we're in the ballpark. And give me a bio. Like, tell me a little bit about you so that I can present you to the seller, so that you have an NDA. I'm going to give you the SIM. Give me this letter of interest, this indication of interest in the form of an email. I will present you to them, and then we move to the interview between the two of you, and then you draft that LOI. And or well, we'll get to that. There's some nuance there, but I think what I would have done is I would have probably pushed back on negotiating the LOI so much. And I would have been like, hey, no, this is the bones of the deal. Like, this is what we're rolling with. Let me get into due diligence and let me get the loan process started. And then we can renegotiate when we get to the purchase agreement. Like, we don't need to haggle the LOI so long.
Interesting. That's the opposite of the advice I give people. But
well, I'm not going to. Okay, so let's talk about. So your advice. So your advice is to haggle out the LOI and to get closer to final terms.
Yeah. If you're gonna, and perhaps positing it worked the way it was intended for you, because the goal is that you haven't paid a dumb lawyer like me thousands of dollars to bury all those terms you're going to disagree about into 30 pages of contracts. You can just keep figuring out whether or not you're going to agree on them or not. And then ultimately you don't agree, and you haven't wasted a bunch of money on lawyers. Or somewhat worse is, by the time, it's a letter of intent, it's pretty short, and it's like, here's the deal terms. The purchase agreement is longer and it's embedded in a lot more legalese. And so sometimes people get to the purchase agreement and they lose sight of the terms that they don't actually agree on. And then they just sign the document, never actually having a meeting of the minds. And that's an outcome that some lawyers almost want, because I think they think, aha, it'll be a gotcha. But I think those are people who've never run a business and been in the situation. Like, so what if you have a gotcha on the other party and you're sitting across from them and they don't want to do something that you want to do? You then have to show them they signed that they would do it. And it's just like a really unpleasant, like, you're going to force them, you're threatening to sue them to do the thing. Like,
and then you're counting on them for transition. So you have to, the buyer then has to work with that person for, 3, 6, 12 months.
Yeah, that's not a good situation to be in, to have a gotcha and be able to, basically force someone to do what you want when they don't want to. It's much better to have that conversation at the LOI stage, in my view, and actually develop a meeting of the minds before and then you sail through the purchase agreement process, which can, that process, when you draft a purchase agreement, so the way it goes is IOI, indication of interest, if you're asked for one, an NDA happen, and then an LOI is negotiated. You start your bank loan process with your LOI if you're the buyer. And the diligence process is undergoing, and you have those terms from the LOI. They might get modified in the diligence process. I keep a transaction checklist that's essentially like a Google sheet. So it's like LOI terms. And then each term has a column for how it's renegotiated through the diligence process, if it is. And then when you get to the purchase agreement, you put all of that into the transaction documents. The buyer initiates the transaction documents, sends them to the seller. The seller's attorney reviews, makes red lines, changes, or just accepts them sometimes, which is eerie. And then you send them to the bank to approve. The bank might make red lines and changes that then you have to send to the seller and get everybody on board. But once it's signed, you're good. And that process that I just described with the buyer, seller, and the purchase agreement is the most tiring for people, because you're sitting on these calls with lawyers and you're looking at 30-page agreements where they're like very boringly explaining to you indemnification and, equivocating, like it's a business judgment call, I say, as somebody decides whether they want to have a liability cap of $1 million or whatever. It's like pulling teeth to go through that process. So anything you can do in the LOI phase where you're still fresh and have energy to make that phase go faster and be less painful, I think is worth doing.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. So I think we kind of went to the middle of the onion. So I'd love to get your thoughts on something, because I think I know how you're going to feel about this. But so I have a deal right now, and I'm the broker on this deal. And small business, it's $1 million. It'll be a sub-$1 million deal. And it's a basic business, not a ton of due diligence to do. And buyers trying to figure out next steps. We're kind of at that stage where, we're not really moving. We're not really moving forward. And it doesn't make much sense to stop at the LOI phase if we could put together a draft of a purchase agreement that includes a clause for due diligence, or a time period for due diligence. And, there will be a transaction lawyer that's going to help with the closing, but it doesn't look like either side's going to lawyer up on actually going through and negotiations and preparation of the document. So as a lawyer, I'm asking you this like kind of counterpoint. Is there a small enough deal where you don't do an LOI, where you actually do just go to the purchase agreement? You do a templated purchase agreement provided by a broker or, some third-party resource, and you have that set up with contingencies.
I get the appeal of that for sure, especially from your perspective, because you're like, everyone's generally on the same page. It's a good fit. There's no lawyers in the room. Like, let's just move this forward. I have seen a ton of the broker proffered purchase agreement templates. A lot of times my clients will say, oh, they already gave us a template to use. And, I know that it'll cost more money for me to revise their template than it will be for me to just use my documents that are good and vetted. And the ultimate work product will be better if we start from scratch. So I just tank those. But I didn't used to. I used to like try to work with them because, brokers have seen so many deals. And they're not good usually. Like they typically have things in them that are worse than having no contract. So, ideally you have a written contract between you and another party. I would rather you have no written contract and just a verbal agreement than have a contract that everyone signed that has a whole bunch of harmful stuff in it, which is usually what it has. And at bare minimum, they always have a bunch of weird indemnifications related to the broker. So it's usually like a third just protective stuff that protects the broker, and then nothing that actually identifies the terms. Nobody reads it. It doesn't actually reflect the deal on the table at all. It becomes really, it gets out of hand. So I know it gets uncomfortable. I know so many brokers are in the position where nobody has a lawyer and they're kind of playing attorney in the middle. And it can be uncomfortable because the liability, there's no other people to share that liability when there's a disagreement. You're the one who's getting subpoenaed as the broker. You're the one who's having to say, I wasn't practicing law. I swear, here's where I advised them all to get their own attorney, but I did give them a legal document and I did make edits to it based on talking to them. And I did give them advice on how it would affect them.
No, I do think that's a slippery slope to practicing law without a license. But so I have a question though. So like, and you know this, we've talked about this before, but there's this like race to the bottom, even amongst attorneys. So I'm like, a purchase agreement that's been used by, I think, look, there's really bad brokers out there. There's some brokers out there that might hand you something that, you should have reviewed. But like, if you're dealing with like a relatively large or experienced broker that's used that purchase agreement on hundreds of transactions, is that better or worse than your like $2,000 flat fee discount purchase agreement from a legit lawyer that, got their law degree at, where did Saul Goodman get his? U.S. Samoa, something like that?
I don't know which one's better. That's a good question. I'm honestly kind of thinking, is it better to just proceed on an LOI and have no purchase agreement at all than have one where there's no quality control, because it could just include a whole bunch of stuff in there that nobody understands that hurts everyone, or more likely hurts one party.
But a bank won't do that, right? You have to have a purchase agreement for.
Yeah, and the bank reviews for their own protection. So the bank, I've seen approve some really terrible agreements with edits, but the edits only protect the bank, right? So I think understandably, and I would feel this way too. I get it. I would think, well, the bank's got lawyers and the bank's lawyers are going to review it, so they wouldn't let me enter into something insane. But I mean, I work with those bank lawyers, and I don't get the feeling that they're like particularly well compensated, or they're not like going way out of the box to try to protect. They're frankly in an adversarial position to you as the person taking out the loan. Like, they are protecting the bank at your expense. And so when they're reviewing it, they come in with this, okay, where are the assets? How can we make sure that when you stop paying the bank, we can come in and take everything you have from you and the seller? So it's just a weird dynamic that doesn't necessarily protect you at all. So I get the appeal. I did have a broker who was very kind, and I had drafted a purchase agreement for a deal that didn't go through. And so the seller had gotten the agreement, a future buyer came, and same seller, and the broker called me and said, can I hire you to change your last document to fit this buyer? And I said, no, I'm conflicted out because I've already represented one potential buyer. I know some stuff I shouldn't, I can't work for the seller, that's a conflict. Sorry. Thank you for asking. And he said, well, can I buy the transaction documents from you? Can I just pay you a flat fee for the purchase agreement? And I won't hire you to do it, but like, I will use it myself. And I was like, that's something I'd never considered before. Sure. Because it had been written for that particular target,
I think custom is always the better way to go. But like, that's kind of the question, right? Like, so some of these templated purchase agreements, I know, so I'm a member of the Business Brokers of Florida. The BBF just put out their new asset purchase agreement, and they spent a lot of money. They spent a lot of money and had a team of lawyers put it together. They had one attorney put the draft together, another one review it, a second review, changes, alterations. Like, They had a team of lawyers put it together. So like some of these are pretty elaborate, but like, so it may be a good document, but again, it's still not tailored to your specific purpose. So it's tough.
I feel
So
better about that though than I do about just, I mean,
yeah, a
honestly,
broker that got something off ChatGPT.
yes. And ChatGPT isn't even that bad because ChatGPT is not going to add the risk of some random non-lawyered agreement. And really, as a lawyer, your risk when you're drafting is that you don't remove something that shouldn't be in there. Like that's almost the biggest risk. And the second is you don't add something that should be. But like having existing language that's in there from some other use that just stays as a legacy language and wrecks things is so high risk that I almost like an OpenAI purchase agreement more than I do using a really beautiful agreement that a lawyer drafted for a totally different matter. Because you've done that right on OpenAI, or like draft a promissory note and it's like bullet point 1, regular language. It's got 10 sentences at the end of it, but it's stuff that a regular person can read and usually understand.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So okay, so timeline wise, and so we're gonna use like so many of the books out there, like M&A for Dummies, the Harvard Business Review books, like all of that's about these deals that are like 25 to like, there it is.
Yeah.
I mean, even that book calls it out that it's like talking about deals that are 25 to $100 million or $100 million and up. So we're talking about deals that are like sub 10 million, sub 5 million, really. Because like a lot of people are like going for SBA. So you're searching, you find a deal you like, you get the NDA, you sign the NDA, look at the SIM, the initial offering memorandum, and then you meet with the seller. I think, in my opinion, from what I've seen, that takes place in like week 1, maybe 2 weeks tops. What do you think? The same?
Yes. I think it's very important to not lose momentum. So it should take place quickly.
Yeah. Well, and I want to put a note on this. So not all businesses have a SIM, and I think there's a lot of influencers out there, a lot of great people that are educating, in different ways, and they're really pushing hard. So look, please, if you're listening to this, if you are a buyer and you want to be taken seriously, ask for the pieces that you need to make decisions. Try not to just use the terms that are being floated around the internet because somebody might not take you seriously. Like there are brokers out there that have been doing this for 30 years and they don't know what these influencers are pushing. So they hear you coming in using private equity terms and you're not a private equity person. They're going to be like, okay, this person has no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So you might not actually be asking for a SIM. Right? What you want is you want some additional financial information. You want the last 3 years of the profit and loss statement, the balance sheet, the statement of cash flow. You want tax returns if you can get them that early. Sometimes a broker will want you to meet with the seller first. But these are the things and then like an executive summary. Like that's pretty much like the bones of what's going to be in a SIM. Okay, so NDA, every deal you're going to sign an NDA because they're all confidential. Every deal you're going to see something like a SIM, either a full SIM packet or the pieces and parts, an executive summary, the financials. That's all week 1. Then you have an initial meeting with the seller. We talked about this on some of the previous episodes. Like, don't overdo it. Like, you're just getting to know the seller at this point. You want to make sure that there's somebody that, they'll sell their baby to. Okay, but then LOI, like, how long does that take? Because mine took 6 weeks. Like, I guess is this like, this is just kind of open, right? Like, so how long, let's put a timeline on a time box to it. Like, how much time do you think it takes on average to do an LOI that you get to like an agreement on? And it could be a range.
Sometimes people just accept them. As you can tell, the LOIs that I put forth have everything in them so that you could just be good and go to closing. So there's not a lot of future negotiation cost. So it's very common for them to elicit conversation, which is half the point, like, okay, I do also own the building and you're now wanting to talk about the rent you're going to pay when you rent the office space from me. And I hadn't really thought about that yet. So there is some kind of eventual. So usually for my clients goes LOI, conversation, revised LOI, sign. So a week, 2 weeks.
Nice. Okay, that's great.
I have had folks that really get into it more. And it's like that deals fall apart there a lot. And, to your point, in your experience, I think that that's good because they're falling apart for real reasons. It's not like everybody just got tired and mad at each other at the end, which is the alternative. It's that you really didn't agree on one of the terms, and that's okay. You don't have to,
It's like it's
So,
getting to know the other person.
yeah.
Okay, so that's great. So it's an NDA SIM initial review, a week, maybe two. LOI, probably 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So you're like a month in at this point. So a month in, you have an agreement. Now I'm going to make a bold claim here, and I'm very new to this. You are not. So please correct me if you disagree, or maybe we just disagree, or I'll abandon this altogether because I have a very weak position on this. But if you're not going to get an LOI, if you are following the advice of a broker, maybe you have a buy side representative and they're trying to get you to go to a purchase agreement, like it is more legally binding than your LOI, but I would still in your mind think of it as being more legally binding, but kind of squishy like an LOI. Like you're using it, but it's probably going to change a lot. And so maybe not a good reason to get into a legally binding situation. Like, what are your thoughts? Where are you at?
I've definitely been hired. I'm thinking of cases in particular where I've been hired after a purchase agreement is signed, and I'm like, cool, I'm done. I can't do anything. You've already agreed to everything. So that's not ideal. In those cases, I have offered an amended purchase agreement, which will essentially gut the concepts of the purchase agreement, identify that we're still going to work on a definitive agreement in the future where everyone will put the real stuff in there, and expand a contingency for your diligence process that is ongoing, like perennial. Because usually when people, like what you're talking about right now, is scrap the LOI, just offer a real simple broker style purchase agreement and get the parties to agree and sign it and be good. And in that, there would always be a diligence contingency. But, you're the broker side. You want the deal to go through. You don't think they need that much time during diligence. You know everything about the business, and it's a good one. So you're going to make that diligence contingency like 30 days max, and they're going to not have an idea at all about the significance of that. And they're going to blow through it because you're corresponding. They're still asking for questions. They're still meeting. The conversations are active and ongoing. They're not even think about the fact that all of a sudden one of these Tuesdays, they are in a binding agreement to pay $1 million for this deal that they think they're still just getting to know about. And that sneaks up on people a ton. So, if I'm the lawyer and I've got a buyer and I'm dealing with that, I'm going in there to try to make sure that the diligence contingency is as long as possible. If the other side won't agree to some kind of like while documents are still being exchanged, it's going to be perennially extended. If they won't agree to that, then, I'm calendaring it and reminding them, get it in writing that we're extending this today, and pushing it as broad as possible so that you can still, and then you always, if there's financing involved, you always have to say that you, in any purchase agreement, if there's a delayed sign and close, even when I do it, I put my documents together. So they sign the purchase agreement as soon as they come to terms on it. So it's off the table. And then the promissory note and all those things get signed the day of closing. So I have big contingencies that say, if I can't get financing for any reason whatsoever, I can void this. So in the pandemic, there were a ton of SBA 7A loans out and that had already been committed to, and they put the kibosh on all of them. So even things that were about to close the next day, they froze all the SBA financing. And so all of these people were under contractual obligations to pay millions of dollars for a business that they had, and they had no way to fund it because there was no financing contingency. So there was a lot of litigation and stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. So people listening this will inevitably end up in a deal where a broker is pushing hard on the broker provided purchase agreement. And so some things that they should ask for, they should make sure that their due diligence is at least 6 weeks. Like, so maybe I think longer than that. So we're talking a pretty small deal, right? Like if you've got a broker pushing you to use a broker provided purchase agreement on a $3 million deal, like you probably need to put your foot down and like go get a lawyer. If it's a small deal, if it's under $1 million and you really are committed to not spending the money on a lawyer and you're going to use a broker provided agreement, so it sounds like they need to stretch out the due diligence. So to give themselves plenty of time, they need to make sure that they add in a financing, some kind of a funding clause for the loan. Anything else? Like, how else can someone protect themselves if they are going to go this route and they're not going to do an LOI and they're going to do a purchase agreement right away before due diligence?
If you are doing a purchase agreement right away before diligence, you really have to make it your full-time job to monitor the deadline associated with it. And if you don't have every single document you've asked for at the end of the 6-week deadline or whatever deadline you get for that diligence contingency, you need to, in writing, say, I want to void this agreement. Like you have to go draconian on it, because absent that, it will go super draconian on you and you will be committed. And think about it from a bad broker's perspective. If you have a 30-day diligence contingency and you're just like TikTok waiting away and somebody has offered you a list of questions and maybe there's one thing that they really shouldn't see that might kill the deal, you can just sit on it for 31 days and they're committed to buying the business. And you haven't done anything fraudulent. You can give it to them at 31 days. They were the one who was dumb enough to sign a purchase agreement and not void it when they hadn't received every single diligence request item that they asked for within that window. So I just think because it's not presented as clearly that it's such a big obligation, people don't understand how binding it is.
Is there any additional clause where if something materially affects the deal in a bigger way, they could still get out of it?
I mean, not really.
I'm thinking back to like our episode with Nathan, where he found out after closing that the seller had signed up a bunch of annual contracts that he then had to service without getting that revenue. There was nothing he could have put into the agreement that would have saved him from that at that point.
Well, so what he's supposed to have is a contract where all of the representations and warranties mirror the diligence process. So everything that they've told him in diligence now is written into the contract as a legally binding promise. And then when it turns out they lied and said there are no other obligations other than what we have already told you about, section 3.01 or whatever, then he has a breach of contract claim against them. But since I don't know if he used a lawyer and it didn't seem like he had a good agreement. So he would have had a toehold for a breach of contract claim. And so it's twofold, right? Like people exchange these diligence checklists. And then I go through and I read all of these representations, which are like legal promises that are supposed to mirror the diligence process. And then when the seller gets it, if they actually read the agreement, which they usually do, or their lawyer reads it with them, it almost always elicits additional information. So, you think you've had a good diligence process, but they go, well, there is this thing, before I just pen to paper, sign a legally binding promise that this is everything. Maybe I should point out that I do have these other, coupons that I gave, or, these other big list of AR, or this person who did, have a data breach when she was our office admin 6 years ago, or, and so it's helpful because you're kind of putting them in a corner to make a promise.
Yeah, so make sure if a broker is providing you with an agreement and you are going to use it, make sure you read the section on the
representations and warranties.
Yeah, the representations and warranties. And I'm a big fan of some kind of a hold back, earn out, earn down, escrow. And what that means at a high level, is that you're going to put some portion, some percentage of the deal into an escrow account that's going to be held for a period of time, 1 year. Mm-hmm. 18 months, 2 years, whatever. But that way, if something is just materially different, you have some type of a lever to pull, some kind of a protection. So it sounds like, make sure you have extra time for due diligence. If you're using a purchase agreement in place of an LOI provided by a broker with no attorney, make sure you have plenty of time for due diligence. Make sure you have a contingency for getting your financing. Make sure you really, really, really understand the reps and warranties. Make sure that you have some kind of a protection post-close.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure there. So like you don't want to have to enforce your purchase agreement anyways. So I would say if you're doing that, whatever, if you're moving forward to buy like $1 million business and you don't want to spend $7,000 on a lawyer, you are quite tolerant of risk. So you probably got to watch yourself and make sure you can buckle down and really dig into the diligences even more aggressively than the average person would.
So we're 4 weeks in. You have an LOI or at least some type of an agreement signed that lays out a price. You're starting due diligence. Due diligence is going to take probably 6 weeks, right? And I think most cases, 6 weeks. That's also the exact same amount of time that most preferred lenders take to put the loan together. So as soon as you get that signed agreement, you're going to apply for the loan and start due diligence at the same time.
Right.
And then, so after that 6 weeks, everything looks good. Your contingency ends on the diligence period. You're moving towards closing. What do you think? 2 weeks to get to closing?
At least 2 weeks. It's usually bank stuff that pushes it. I would say the best thing you can do, I've had really responsive buyers who respond within like 20 minutes to any request from the bank or from me or from the other side. And those sail through almost as fast as they want them to, if you have a preferred lender and you've got a good bank. But absent that, if you're in the middle of tax season, like we have been, they have been really dragging out because, it takes longer to get responses. But yeah, I think 2 weeks is reasonable. I say 45 days.
If you're a cash buyer, you can close faster. If you have to do some extensions, it can take longer. But it sounds like a good time frame to plan on is 3 months, 90 days to get from, NDA to closing.
I agree. Yep.
So a number that I threw out yesterday, because I'm talking to a client who is going to be doing multiple acquisitions and we're trying to budget out for the future. So I threw out a number of about $30,000 per deal. These are going to be a little bit larger deals. So that $30,000 is to cover diligence, financial, legal diligence, and contracts. It's just like a ballpark per deal, so we know what we're burning if we walk away from deals. On these smaller deals, you mentioned $7,000 for a purchase agreement. What do you think someone should have in their pocket, in their bank account, for diligence and contracts on a deal that is smaller, say under $1 million, under $2 million, something like that?
Well, I live right in that realm. So under 2 million is like really different for me than under $1 million. Because under $1 million is really small. But also I paid a lot less than that for my house. And like, I definitely paid to get an inspection and signed a legal contract and did a title search and things like that. So
if you'll pay $10,000 in closing costs on a house, like you should be willing to pay $10,000 on a, closing on a business that's, at least based on averages in the US, 2 to 3 times more than the house you live in.
And the house you live in, you can walk through it, knock on walls and stuff. The business you may have never even seen in person. So there's warranted some additional inquiry. So I would say, I think this book even said like $25,000 for legal, which I was like, I don't know if that's true. And for small deals, like under $1 million, I try to really say you can run it yourself as much as you want as the buyer, and you should not delegate. You cannot delegate. You have to do it yourself if you want to keep it cheap. And then, $10,000 legal probably tops. And then it depends on if you get a Q of E. It's hard to find a affordable quality of earnings report from a CPA. And it just depends on the client's tolerance and how good I can't tell you how many people's just like tax preparers are also moonlighting as free Q of E providers. They'll say, I sent the books over to my accountant and they said it looks good. And you're like, what is that person doing that for you for free? And they don't know what they're looking at. Like, why would they know that? So, if you do that, if you use your existing tax preparer and you feel like that's good enough and you can just use a point and shoot lawyer and then do everything else yourself, then you should be getting in under $15K. But I mean, you should at least be spending $15,000 to try to secure your assets.
So actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because in order to join the Business Buyers Club, you do have to have $15,000 or access to $15,000 minimum to cover due diligence. Like we're fine if you have a game, like if you got really great experience and you think you're going to be a great business owner and you want to bring an investor in to cover your down payment, that's fine. But you have to have $15,000 to cover diligence, because if you're going to try to skip diligence, like that's just not something we want to get into.
Yeah, it's so dangerous. It's just buying this black box. And I mean, it's short-sighted because you're going to pay for that $15,000 in the first couple of weeks of poorly running the business you don't know anything about because you didn't do diligence.
Right. No, and again, go back to the episode with Nathan Platter, who, he did what he thought was really good diligence, and then now is burning. He told us on camera. So go back, watch the episode. I think it was like $5,000 a month, something like that. Like what did you say? You said such a great thing, and I've heard it before, but I don't use it enough. An ounce of prevention is
worth a pound of cure. Yeah.
Worth
a pound of cure. So it's, I mean, it's very short-sighted. And I mean that in both ways. I'm not just trying to like gin up money for service providers. I really think that, a lot of people don't hire me because I'm not offering to take diligence off their plate. Because I'm like, I'm not going to be running this business. You need to figure it out. I'm here to answer questions. I'm here to offer tips and guidelines and checklists and structure. But you can't just farm it out, give me a data room access and go, I did diligence. I'm going to check that off. Like, you have to do it. Why do you want to buy a business to run if you're not wanting to run the business?
Well, and so here's something that I think is really interesting, because there's a broker in my office and he is fantastic. I've learned so much from him and he's got so much experience, but he comes from a time where, and he and I had this funny conversation, so if he hears it, it'll be okay. But he comes from a time where business people, businessmen, businesswomen were buying businesses. So his whole opinion is like, if it's under $1 million, they're going to do their due diligence. They're going to go down the general ledger line by line. They're going to go through the bank statement line by line and ask a question about every single line item. And I had to tell him that's not really the case anymore. Like with the SBA program, with all these training groups coming out, there are a lot of creatives that are buying businesses and they don't want to look at bank statements. They don't want to understand the P&L. And so your broker may tell you don't need due diligence, but that's because in their mind, they're used to decades of buyers who are savvy, financial, analytical, and they're not used to dealing with creatives or, even this like millennial generation that, just doesn't have that attention to detail into how a business is run by the numbers. Where, so many people are, more emotional and relationship oriented, which you can run a business. You can be an exceptional entrepreneur with a focus on emotion and that EQ. But to buy the business, you need to understand the numbers. And if you don't do it, you got to outsource it.
Yeah. And if somebody is trying to sell you on taking that off your plate, like don't spend that money. Take that and put that money back in your pocket, because you're the one who has to know the contracts and the vendors and who the phone service is through and what software they use and when that software subscription renews and all of this.
You just made a really great distinction because I didn't speak clearly with what I was just saying. When I say outsource it, you can't outsource it and not know it. What I mean when I say
Yeah.
outsource it, you need to outsource the muckety muck of the work to somebody who can
Yes.
explain it to you thoroughly.
Yes.
Like
That's
somebody
true.
who's going to teach you.
Yeah.
You can't just push it off and never look at it. Like you either need
Yeah.
to learn it on your own and understand it on your own, or outsource it to someone who can then teach you and explain to you.
I had a client last year who's entrepreneur buying business with not experience like you're talking about, and he said multiple times, I'm just really bad at admin, so I'm not going to do that. I'm really bad at admin. And I was like, that is the thing you need to be good at. That is maybe the only thing that you need to be good at if you're buying a business with a bank loan, just the process of buying the business, and then, gosh, running the business. So it's kind of all admin.
Absolutely. And this is where I know that I'm a contrarian in this. I do believe that everybody could be a business owner, and maybe that's just naive and, hopelessly optimistic, but, I think you can figure it out. I've seen a lot of really successful people come from various backgrounds with various personality types. It's definitely easier if you understand the admin, but like if you don't, you have to know the pieces. You have to know who needs to be on your team. And maybe you're not, maybe you're not the main character, maybe you don't own 100% of the business you acquire because you need that admin, you need that analyst, you need the marketer, salesperson, and maybe you have to chop it up to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. But recognizing your own deficiencies and getting enough into the weeds that you can properly delegate to people who have the expertise is, I mean, it's no small feat. I haven't had to do it. And it's hard. It looks terrible. So, but people do it and you have to. So
I think that this was a really thorough summary that we have done here on the timeline, what to expect, when to expect it, and how much to expect to pay for it.
Yeah.
So there we are. Acquisitions 101. Right. This has been episode 11. Sara and I are back from a couple weeks off and post-tax season, post-massive eclipse party, and talking about the steps, timeline, and price of doing a deal and why most businesses really do fail even before due diligence. Thanks for listening. If you got some value from this, like, subscribe, leave a comment on what you would like to learn about the acquisition process or who you'd like for us to talk to. And see you next time.
Big, I gotta make it just for my kids and for their kids' kids. That's wealth years and years. Promise my brother soon as he out and finish this bid, we finna do it bigger than